I will make a short introduction. I will tell just a little bit for our possible audience online, a few words about the project. Then I will introduce you, and then you have the floor. And also I have to mention that all your colleagues are in person here, and you will be able to follow. And again, sorry for the situation that arrived from not being possible to receive a visa from the Romanian consulate, which we all tried, but it didn't happen.
Yes.
So Museum of Real Estate Development. This is the third day when we gathered here in Iași to try and build together some sort of possibilities of assembling this kind of museum, let's say, as a tool of looking into the future and also into the past. It's a heterogeneous group of artists, theoreticians, curators, and researchers that meet in person in the frame of this museum. During this meeting, all contributors offered glimpses of their knowledge, and are still doing that, related to the extended theme. Additionally, the set of presentations that happened today and is happening also, that happened yesterday and is happening also today, attempt to connect two sides of production, the space of contemporary production and activism and the space of academia and activism. We think that these two sides have in common a shared and overlapping interest in locality and urban space, followed by an extension of this interest towards wider economical, political, social contexts and processes. In this context, the emergence of an advancement of real estate development allows us, or maybe allows us to observe how global, national and local factors and actors, capital, land, labor, interact and change their behavior and appearance. Today conference will start with Semeneh. If I am right, and I'm usually wrong, we'll continue with Ovidiu Țichindeleanu, then Enikő Vincze, then Turia, Mick Wilson, and at the we will end with our guests Anna and Mark from STEALTH.unlimited. Semeneh Ayalew Asfaw holds a PhD in political studies from the University of Cape Town. His dissertation, The Young and the Urban in Addis Ababa, towards a popular history of the 74 Ethiopian Revolution, between 50s and 74, explores the nexus between socio-cultural processes, subject formation, and the Ethiopian Revolution. Asfaw research and publications cover themes ranging from social and cultural history, political consciousness, revolutionary terminology, youth, subject formation, city-making, and urbanism in the 20th century in Ethiopia. As a fellow at the Africa Institute in Sharjah, UAE, he plans to further his research on the relationship between cultural processes and subject formation. I don't know if I should continue or should just leave you the floor?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. It's unfortunate that I couldn't join you in person, but I'm very happy to speak to you, to be in conversation with all of you virtually as part of this extremely interesting and important project. So I do not have a PowerPoint that I could share with you for the presentation, so I'll be simply reading the presentation, the talk. So the subject that I will be talking to you about today is basically the title is The Making of a Capital, the State, Urban Modernity and Class Subjects in Post-War Addis Ababa, that is 1941-1974. So to basically give you an introduction to the talk, in this talk I seek to show some key factors that contributed to class formation in post-war Addis Ababa, i.e. between 1941 and 1974, a period that is also referred to in the academic literature as the pre-revolution period. I argue class formation and the production of a broad gamut of social classes and groups in the capital of Imperial Ethiopia, that is Addis Ababa, as a function of the entwined processes of state activity and social action. The first part of the presentation will survey the role of the modernist imperial state in the transformation of the physical spaces of the capital. And the second focuses attention to strategies of survival as a creative act of diverse forces in society. While the first section demonstrates how the state delineated space through urban design, the construction of modern residential, commercial and public buildings, squares and infrastructural networks such as roads in the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s, the second part or section of this presentation shows how two key interrelated processes, namely rural-urban influx and informalization of work and settlement, concentrated predominantly young, poor urban inhabitants in Addis Ababa in the post-war period. So, moving to the first section of the presentation, I want to talk about state modernity in pre-revolution Addis Ababa. 1974 was a year of unrest that stirred almost every section of Addis Ababa society to rebellion, creating a revolutionary situation in Ethiopia. With the notable exception of the upper echelons of the imperial regime, the royal family, the landed aristocracy, and the nobility, the mood of rebelliousness in the city enlisted almost all other segments of society in the capital in explicitly political social protests and in opposition against the ruling imperial regime. The mass character of popular revolt in 1974 Addis Ababa brought about the convergence of disparately situated social groups and classes that manifested the shared sentiments and aspirations of disparate agents who in 1974 rose to action to transform the social, economic, political and cultural contradictions of imperial rule in Ethiopia. In this part of my talk, I will briefly show how the role of the modernist imperial state in the transformation of the physical spaces of Addis Ababa was significant in the years that preceded, in the years and decades that preceded the 1974 revolution that I briefly mentioned before. The imperial state, through urban design, the construction of modern commercial and public buildings, squares and infrastructural networks, such as roads, the building of schools and hospitals, the modernization of municipal administration, the expansion of the state media and the state bureaucracy, dominated and delineated the spaces of the capital and the imperial urban centers through urban design, the construction of modern commercial and public buildings. The period between 1955 and 1968 is described as the boom period, which saw a building activity unprecedented in the history of the city, that is Addis Ababa. Building of schools and hospitals, first project was the modernization organization by the World supported the building of infrastructure, state such as roads and highways during the dominated and delineated the space of the capital in the projects of modernization in the 1960s were at least partially supported financial analysis such as World Bank, and millions of dollars flowed into the economy of the country, and especially in these decades. The population of the capital concomitantly ballooned from a mere 100,000 in 1941 to about 400,000 in 1950. In just about 10 years, the population growth thus showed four-fold increase. And in the 1960s and 70s, this number actually grew much more exponentially. For instance, if we take the year 1973, the population of the city grew to about 1 million plus population in 1973. The modernist impulses of the imperial state were also expressed in the ways in which it sought to discursively construct and regulate the social, economic, and cultural life of the inhabitants of Addis Ababa. The state's attempt to proclaim itself as the purveyor of modern civilization that diverged with the reality of the prevalent impoverishment in the city. This divergence generated a state media campaign in the late 1950s, 60s, and 70s that blamed the urban masses for the lack in national progress and prosperity. This media campaign discursively depicted rural Ethiopia as virgin territory, rich with abundant arable land, and represented the city as a site of oversupply of labor. Young residents of the city, especially those who recently immigrated from the countryside, were marked as loiterers, panhandling in cities, waiting away badly needed productive labor that could have been used in the cultivation of the abundant arable land of the nation. Rural-urban migration was marked as the culprit not only for the social ills of the city, urban poverty, lack of proper housing, and unemployment, but also for the underdevelopment of the country at large. For instance, Manan, the famous Amharic monthly, warned in one of its 1959 issues that directly cited the Emperor Haile Selassie's September 18, 1959 speech. The magazine said, "Those who are physically able shall not be allowed to loiter about the cities." Such state media, so the state basically, media used its communication apparatus and the media to marshal and hail citizens, especially the urban poor, the unemployed, and the peasantry. Such injections was an act of subject formation without direct violence to shape the behavior of subjects by reproducing the relations of production that was extant in the country. As another Manan editorial published in October 1959 charged, it appears obvious that there is no shortage of labor in Ethiopia. Indeed, there seems to be an oversupply in the cities. Meanwhile, as the emperor indicated, there is work to be done in the rural areas. Loitering and panhandling by able-bodied persons in the cities is certainly a most unproductive form of human endeavor. All the more so when able-bodied persons can be put to productive use in the countryside. Lolling idly under sunlight and electric lights in the cities is a squandering of time and potential productive labor. Therefore, it is only appropriate that His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie, warned that those who are physically able shall not be allowed to loiter about the cities. The states claim that the city was inundated with an oversupply of migrants from the countryside who are unwilling to work abundant rural land, ignored the deep structural inequality in the class system of the country as an explanation for underdevelopment. Moreover, this state propaganda also sidestepped the structural factors behind the growth of informalization in urban centers, the extreme inadequacy of jobs in industry, manufacturing, and other forms of formal employment, as well as the paucity of proper residential housing for the city's majority. The majority, predominantly poor residents in the city, had to live and survive as dependents on family members and relatives, or affixed themselves in large, dilapidated, rented mud dwellings in the various quarters of the city. In the year 1961, for instance, 67% of the city's adult population lived as tenants in rented houses. In the year 1967-68, for instance, as a testament to the serious shortages of housing and soaring rent prices, the majority inhabitants of the city resided in shacks and mud houses. Out of the total number of houses in Addis Ababa, 150,338, more than half, which is 83,076, were classified by the Central Statistics Office as semi-permanent mud wood dwellings. The ownership structure of land during the post-war period also excluded 90% of Addis Ababa's adult population, who were above 19 years old. This trend continued unchanged until the year 1974, which is the year of revolution. It was the years following the revolution that radically transformed land relations in urban centers of the country. In 1974, with the nationalization of urban land and extra housing and the distribution of urban land and housing units for those who lived in rented residential structures, not only abated increase in the price of rent, but also made land resources for the construction of housing units for those sections of society who did not have access to land before. So the revolution was such an important historical landmark in transforming land relations and access to cheap residential housing that was nationalized by the state after the outbreak of the 1974 revolution. So militancy in 1974, Addis Ababa was also preceded by the emergence of popular classes and groups as a broad gamut of variously situated social groups and classes in the decades prior to the 1974 conjuncture. So in this second section, I will try to show how popular social activity was significant and important in the making of the city from below. An urban mass, predominantly young in pre-revolutionary Addis Ababa, came to reside in the capital as a result of complex socio-cultural and economic processes due to the implication of state activity and social practices that engendered demographic influx from the countryside and proliferation of informalization of settlement and work into the capital. Class formation in Addis Ababa in this period was also a product of not only of state modernization projects and the state's discursive campaign to hail subjects of empire that we discussed above, but city making was also a function of massive rural-urban migration as a social strategy of everyday people to improve their socio-economic positions in post-war Addis Ababa society. Modernist infrastructural developments of the capital were thus made by rural-urban influx that concentrated predominantly young, poor urban inhabitants who came to settle in informal dwellings and engage in the informal sector of the economy. Addis Ababa was thus comprised of predominantly poor and disparate conglomeration of situated subjects and classes. This period witnessed the emergence of new classes of labor engaged in the formal and informal employment sector of the capital. These include, among others, industrial workers, petty traders, brokers, porters, domestic workers, servants, sex workers, civil servants, professionals, employees of service delivery agencies, as well as occupational groups such as artisans. The post-war period also registered the emergence of a new and significant amount of unwaged urban subjects in the city, such as the unemployed, vagrants, street dwellers, and a large number of school students. And both these waged and unwaged social forces came to make up the class character and demographic picture of the imperial capital. In this period, where the state media discursively constructed largely young migrants from the countryside who ended up in urban centers like Addis Ababa as surplus labor and accused them of loitering, panhandling, and in migration and informalization of settlement and work served as key social strategies, albeit precarious, for a large swath of the expanding urban population who sought opportunities of subsistence and livelihood in the post-war city. The city's underclass that these post-war decades gave rise to were products of the dialectical processes of urbanization of the city by state-led modernization, as well as the city-shaping activities of everyday people who resided in the city. As much as the state, everyday inhabitants of the capital also transformed, modified, and organized Addis Ababa from below through their dwellings as well as lived social practices. Informality was thus was especially a feature of the hyper-frequented city center and the early suffers or old neighborhoods of Addis Ababa like Ube Barha, Saratenya Safar, River Kantu, and Taklahema. In the city center, the expansion of sex work, beer brewing, and the flourishing of tea houses and bars provided the occasion for city making by women brewers, garment workers, petty traders, and such social figures who are part of the urban underclass in the post-war period. For instance, Deja Chube Safar, a neighborhood which is otherwise popularly called Wube Barha, was transformed into the main red light district and entertainment center of the capital, mainly as a result of the creative energies of women, beer brewers, and sex workers. The social energies and creative living practices of women was instrumental in the production of the neighborhood and the city as the most hyper-frequented entertainment hub of the city. The ways of being prevalent in neighborhoods like Wubebarhain Saratenya Safar, transformed the demographic picture and class character of the city, but also transformed the cultural identity of the youth in the post-1950s. For instance, Lagash Dorase, in a key sociological study that was done in the 1970s, puts the number of sex workers in Addis Ababa, particularly concentrated in the city center, in 1973 to be 80,000. According to Lagash, sex work constituted about 25% of the total productive adult female population in the city. Therefore, the structural context in which the city evolved and developed with limited formal employment in industry, manufacturing, and in the state bureaucracy necessitated the expansion of informal work for the city's majority. Informality, therefore, catered for the material needs of the bulk of the urban population, even if informal workers, their informal settlements, or their cultural lives were not products of the state's willful design. As discussed above, the imperial state was engaged in a systematic media campaign to discourage and prevent rural-urban migration from the late 1950s onwards. It accused and admonished especially young migrants and peasants in its media platforms, stage performances and theaters for their lack of strong work ethic and self-application. This media campaign did not emerge, however, just from the ruling elite's attitudes and perceptions of the rural population, or the state's desires to reproduce obedient social classes that perform their assigned duties in the existing economic system of imperialism. This media campaign was also generated as a response to the unprecedented level of population influx that the post-war period witnessed, that resulted in urban surplus labor in an urban economy that could not support the employment needs of dramatically expanding numbers of city dwellers, both fresh arrivals from the countryside and pre-existing residents. The employment structure that the state private enterprises only employed a small segment of the industrial and the civil service sector, which had a high attraction for migrants, employed a small segment of job seekers, for instance, in the 1960s. In the 1960s, at a time when migration into Addis Ababa became the most important factor for the growth of the population of the city, formal employment only catered for a small segment of the productive population, even if industry and civil service employment were the two key sectors of formal employment in Addis Ababa. In 1967, for instance, the share of industrial employment was only 31,862 out of the total reproductive active population of 150,052 people in the city. In 1968, the civil service sector, for instance, employed a mere 22,000 people, while industry employed about 36,000 people in the city, where total employment stood at 285,375 people in a city where the population size was close to 700,000. This is significant, especially in the 1960s, where more than 68% of the total population of the country were under 30. This led to an employment situation where the majority of the productive population of the city were employed in what Getahun Bentley called community, social, and personal services, referring to people employed as servants, domestic workers, sex workers, petty traders, daily laborers, brokers, etc. So let me conclude my presentation by highlighting the resonances of the process of city making in Addis Ababa in the post-war period with contemporary processes of urban development and urbanization in the present moment in Ethiopia, particularly in Addis Ababa. As mentioned in the beginning, in 1974, the crisis of imperial rule and its socio-economic contradictions that the modernization projects of the state produced came to full view with the outbreak of social protests in 1974. In these protests, the needs and aspirations of diversely situated social classes and groups were articulated through riots, strikes, petitions, and public demonstrations. Likewise, the social and economic contradictions of urban development and modernization projects of the current Ethiopian regime are likely to be made by the city-shaping activities of ordinary people and residents of the city. Moreover, the social opposition already registered towards the urban modernization projects of the current government suggests that society will continue to strive to modify and transform the city according to their needs and desires. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask if there are questions from the public. If yes, I will need to come with the mic here. Do you have a question? No.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just a question, if you could talk a little bit about the predominance of the informal sector now in Addis Ababa and its influence on the life of the city.
Okay. The informal sector is still the most important employer in the city's economy. About 70% of Addis Ababa's employment is actually garnered from the informal sector still. So it's only 30% of the productive population that is employed formally in, of what was happening in the 1950s, 60s, 70s in Addis Ababa to the present is very, very much important to note in thinking about the modernization projects of the state that is underway in the current moment in Addis Ababa. That is displacing tens of thousands of people from the city center to remove them to peri-urban areas, basically dispossessing people of land and so on, and giving land to investors rather than to the population.
Thank you. Oh. Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other question? Anyway, Semeneh, you will stay with us till the
Yes.
end, and
Yes.
in
Yes.
my place will come the next contributor, Ovidiu Țichindeleanu, who just asked you the question before.
Okay.
Ovidiu Țichindeleanu is a Romanian philosopher, translator, educator, and cultural theorist, writing on critical, writing on, critical social theory, decolonial thought, international politics, and cultural history. His work foregrounds cultural activism on transnational, transperipheral, and intercultural connections, as well as political journalism in Romanian platforms, indie media, critic attack, regional and international outlets, leftist, cross-border talks, or Eastern European context. He is also editor of the Romanian Journal of Contemporary Art and critical theory Idea, Art and Society, and collection coordinator at Idea Publishing House. Today, he will be the title of his contribution is The Semi-Periphery and the Internal Divide of the Middle Class, and recent studies on the city as a site of capital accumulation and political violence, as well as on urbanity and as a concentration of symbolic power, and at the same time as erasure of select memories, have brought a deeper understanding of the specific transformation of capitalism itself in its course after 3 decades of transition to the capitalism of Eastern Europe. He proposed a synthesis of these contributions and a reflection on the internal contradictions of class formation at the semi-periphery, bringing into focus the trajectory of local elites in a world system which is undergoing fundamental transformations.
Absolutely. Okay. We are on, right? Okay. Hi, I'm Ovidiu. I'll talk very shortly about, just introduce a few thoughts about the processes in the region and about a little bit getting together a few disparate thoughts from disparate strains of research. So I would again start by saying that I'm speaking from this standpoint of an organic field of critical theory that has developed in the past 3 decades the analysis of what was called the post-socialist condition, the post-socialist transition in Eastern Europe, and what only after about 20 years I have come to call the transition to capitalism. And quite a few people have developed in this field relevant knowledge by way of art practices, philosophy, cultural history, social sciences. And all these people have contributed to this, let's call it a domain, that has added scholarly resources and personal experience to the collective process of understanding the rare historical event of a paradigm shift, of a radical change of the totality of experience, of the economy, of the society, even of the horizons of expectations, and of the normalized individual perceptions. That was the power of '89 for us, right? Now, as the world is going through the turbulent times of what is possibly another great transition, at a scale far larger that encompasses our cities, our regions, and even our continental footing. And as the crises have been accumulating with no signs of alleviation, let alone suspension, this precious knowledge of analyzing paradigm shifts is needed across domains of work. But a lot of work at reorientation is needed, reorientation of thought, to guide a modernity that seems to be out of control of its worst tendencies. Now, within this field of critical theory in Central and Eastern Europe, a growing consensus had emerged, namely that first, that the transition to capitalism has been a violent process which has brought some gains, but tremendous demographic, economical, and also ecological costs. This process entailed sacrifices, radical devaluation, deindustrialization, mass migration, we know. At the end of this process, the former East European socialist states have settled into the semi-periphery of the world economy. Now, what this means is that they are permanently under the pressure of the core powers of the world political economy, that they are constantly haunted by processes of peripheralization, which are contradicting the promises of '89. The condition of semi-periphery also means that these places are exerting at their turn internal regional pressure, one against another, to other semi-peripheral countries or processes engaged in a red race to the bottom. The condition of semi-peripherality entails the permanent resurgence of situations of political and economic domination, which are similar to situations of domination in peripheral areas, but with the added different opportunities. Now, at the onset of COVID and before the war, there was another dimension of this growing consensus of the critical theories of Central Eastern Europe, namely that East Central Europe has experienced growth, and somehow it has achieved what could be called the best that could be achieved in the situation of the semi-periphery, a relatively managed dependency with some upward tendencies. Cornel Ban has called this new model of growth the export-led dependent growth regime, a transformation to export-driven economies, which was led by FDIs, foreign direct investments. Kostas Lapavitsas, right, highlighted the phenomenon of subordinate financialization, which has brought a change at the core of financialization, whose main agents have stopped being the banks and have become the capital markets. Equity funds, hedge funds, and all kinds of new financial institutions. So subordinate financialization changes the system from top to bottom, but being systemic, it does drag households into global finance, and this system relies then on the support and complicity of the state and of local administrations. The REDERB team, part of which is present here, has further refined the analysis of the current transformations of capitalism, which have brought changes in the core processes of accumulation. This seemed to confirm Chase Dunn's old hypothesis of what he called semi-peripheral development, according to which, in the long history of capitalism, structures as well as modes of accumulation do change in the core as a result of transformations that occur actually in semi-peripheral areas. Now, enough of this. The semi-peripheral rise of Central Eastern Europe was also accompanied by a power grab of local elites and the resurgence of everyday nationalism. Now, Wallerstein kept on insisting that semi-peripheries have traditionally ensured the survival of the modern world system since its inception, in spite of its many and recurring crises. Because of their intermediate position, semi-peripheries are filling the divide, the growing divide all the time between the exploiting cores and the exploited periphery. So this task of the semi-periphery, Wallerstein has also insisted, has been mostly a political task, not an economic function. So it has materialized in pressures, political pressures, that have also taken the form of wars. Now, currently, the question of the re-embedding of the political in the economical, of the social into the economical, becomes then, in this context, a matter of survival, not only of change. And hence the importance of this simple question that I'm raising. What has been happening in the life of the middle classes formed in this semi-periphery? What limits have been reached within this relative rise? What internal contradictions have started to emerge? How are the elites made at the end of the transition to capitalism? Now, history teaches us, among many things, that the semi-peripheral rise towards the core is a path fraught with dangers. And as we are confronted with the probable historical bifurcation, as the world system itself is undergoing perhaps a great transition, precisely at the moment when Eastern Europe has settled again into the position of semi-periphery, and perhaps it has created the personnel and the middle class for a relatively managed dependency. These different rhythms of the transition of the world economy and of East European adjustments to it are reflected both on capital shifts and rearrangement of the massive accumulations of capital, which are indifferent to the democratic wishes of the middle classes. An untouchable upper middle class has started to become visible throughout the region. After more than 3 decades of being, let's say, the main buyer or the prime internalizer and consumer of the middle class dream, also of the European dream, of the neoliberal free market dream, now the lower middle class is facing the erasure of its own aspirations and of its own recent history too. Traditionally, the middle class of a semi-periphery considered assimilation into the core models a success story. Actually, it even defined what success is. But in time, this means that the lower middle class is confronted eventually with its own erasure as a political and economical subject. However, as long as it internalizes the old relationships of subordination, it does not experience its own erasure as contradiction. Boiling frogs. So my call is simply an invitation to pay attention to the internal divides within the middle class, to the cracks appearing in this changing context. Now, we are talking about, in the region, about people who have entered generally their professional fields very young, about people who are very proud of their achievements. They are models of success very often, more or less prominent. They usually are, or often are, overworked and keep on working very hard. A lot of them have endured abuses one way or another in their working environments, not only due to the external pressures of the transition. Vacations do not suffice to give them quietude. Or very often they rely heavily on friendship circles, some from the old socialist world, or on external hobbies in order to survive the world of consumerist success. Often they work in institutional interfaces between the national and the international. The middle class of the semi-periphery has become middle class against the general trend of their societies, not with the rise of their societies. The general trend of their societies entailed gapping divides, more dependency, and overall impoverishment. So the middle class of the semi-periphery are not representatives of social mobility, but temporary winners of the rat race to the bottom. Structurally, they are far more likely to fall to a lower middle class or worse, to succumb to exhaustion or to sociopathy, to break under mental pressures, rather than to ascend to the eternal safety of the upper middle class. The public sphere to which they could refer, or where they could find a site of expression, is also questionable. In the global context of changes, the legacy institutions of enlightenment are also undergoing major transformations. The museum, the university, the city itself are being changed and challenged as places of emancipation and education. A different kind of public sphere and sites of education might be needed to accommodate this new situation. Within Eastern Europe, the newly aspiring middle classes have been socialized in the past 30 years in a culture of erasure of the local history, and are currently unprepared to face the erasure of their own history. They have produced weak elites politically and economically at the scale of great transformations, comparable to the second generation of the decolonization movement and its failure in the early 70s. The internal divide between the lower and the upper middle classes has become at points visible as it is unsurpassable. And yet, the lower middle classes are inscribed in a movement against devaluation, as they are catching up to a multitude of internal contradictions. Their orientation, the orientation of the lower middle classes, the orientation of their relation to the upper middle classes, the nature of this relation, whether accommodating, resistive, or positive, could be the deciding political agency of the semi-periphery in this age of surging imperialisms and great transitions. Thank you.
Are there any questions to Ovidiu? Yes. Okay. Wait.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I need a consensus. Thank you for your presentation. I feel that many of the empirical sets of data that you present are very interesting, and I'm in agreement with that. And just a bit conceptually, I'm not really at ease with the idea of thinking this, the idea of middle class, upper, lower middle class, a coherent explanation with the idea of that. So I'm really curious about if you can elaborate a little bit more about the ideas behind this kind of social stratification, because in a way it seems that it's a special category that you're referring to, and I think empirically it makes sense, but I don't know if I would call it class. It's an heuristic device for something, but I'm not really sure what. I think the direction is good, but maybe it's a little bit misleading to talk about it in terms of middle and lower class. This is my reaction.
Yeah, I guess you are very right in saying that it's more of a heuristic device than also an observational device than completely elaborated concept. In the same way, let's say Eastern Europe is not a geographical entity, but is a concept that has its own concreteness, right? I would say that it is important to think of it as class because it allows, I think, it allows us to reopen the question of class analysis within this restructuring processes of the transition to capitalism in Eastern Europe. A traditional term for the lower middle class has been petit bourgeoisie. Petit bourgeoisie may not reflect, there's been a lot of literature that says, all right, we cannot really call petit bourgeoisie what has been formed at the level of the lower middle class, I don't know, in Argentina, in Romania, in Guinea. Hence, lower middle class as an imperfect descriptor. But the important thing is this internal contradiction emergent. I hope I will get more answers from new research, and practices. This internal contradiction within the middle class as a site of political emergence and intervention.
Somehow related to this discussion, I was thinking all the time during your presentation about the concrete distinction between working class that was formated in socialism in Romania, that is a working class that holds property, but does not exploit actually. So employees or even people that are getting pension from the state that own property. This is the specific working class that we have somehow inherited from socialism. And I was thinking how you may differentiate between lower middle class and this kind of working class that has the ethos, the history, and everything else related to the working class. For me, I think it's a very in terms of impoverishment versus aspiration and opportunity to get rich and have success, and then go back to impoverishment if you have a burnout or are being sacked or so. But I think that the limit between the two cannot be established very clearly. I mean, if you have success, you are a lower middle class. If you cease having success, you go back to the working class or something. I don't know. How do you see that?
Well, yeah, in a way, it's the pressure is downward. The pressure is downward, not upward. So let's say the dream and the education that is sold is of upward social mobility, whereas structurally the pressure is downward. Not to lose your house, not to lose the property that you have, not to lose your job, not to lose your career, not to lose your mental health, not to lose. The pressure is downwards in this sense. So, and it's contradicting the discourse of growth, even when there is growth. Right. So the way this settles with the legacy of all the older for social formation and this new social formation that has been brought, I guess this is more visible also in the generational change, right? So when you have this transfer of generations, that also means, does it mean a change of class? When you have new generations, let's say, inheriting apartments built by socialism, right? And all of a sudden, those are not the places to host friends, create exhibitions, and do other things, but they are the value of 100,000 that can be used for, right? That's a big change. That's a huge change, and that's a change then that comes with different kind of life decisions and different kind of social relations, and but again, the pressure is not to lose that, yeah. And then the pressure, the question of let's put it this way: if there are vectors of accumulation, then there's a split not only between the exploiters and the exploited, but between the ones that accumulate, who go on the ladders of social mobility, and the ones who resist losing simply, and simply live on the surface.
I think also that that the question of inheritance of houses from socialism is also a very relative one, because we all always think of the value in terms of money, of the value of an apartment, for example, that becomes inherited, and so like immediately we think, oh, so they could sell this apartment and get a lot of money, but this is never like that, because you cannot just sell your house and go where and lose all the relations you have, all the paths through the city and so on. So it's you're sitting on a pile of money, but you cannot sell the apartment. And if you would sell it, you would have to split it between the children and the grandchildren, so the money wouldn't be that much, and so on. I mean, I'm very, I always think about this idea of working class and middle class in the aftermath of socialism and its housing policies, what it has created in terms of class, and I think it's not that easy to
It links semi-periphery and periphery. And you have peripheries that are deindustrializing and they start to have some aspects of periphery, and you have peripheries struggling to become somehow higher in the global hierarchy. And in these territories you have cities that are capital cities that are richer, and they coagulate richer, they coagulate the middle class, they coagulate the rich, and then you have the rest, like the hinterland as it's called. So, but I'm wondering, how do you see this playing out in the wider geography? What do you think, how do you think the next periphery will look like and the next semi-periphery will look like? More speculative question.
I mean, this issue with the differences, for instance, in the language of the intercity rivalry and competition that you uncovered at every and each step, that's clearly right what it is this internal pressure within the semi-periphery. So even if it's formulated like we have to do better than to catch up with Cluj, actually the pressure is downwards. It's like, oh, if we don't do this, we lose the train. We lose the train. So the pressure is this semi-peripheral pressure of that is formulated in upward terms, so it's actually a downward pressure. And in time, it's inevitable that it will have, as it always did in history, very big losing regions. The semi-periphery always has temporary moments of coming to course and assimilating some core processes, and then big disasters. And so the purpose of staying afloat is also to kind of avoid the big disasters. And unfortunately, in our region, we started the transition to capitalism through war, and now it ends with it has ended, or it ends, or whatever happens, with another war. There's consistency through it, right? And the disaster, of course, can take many forms, not only the destruction of war, but other kinds of utter destruction and devaluation.
Ovidiu, thank you for the presentation. I really like it. I think it helps us to think the transformations in the region in a wider sense, think them as a totality, look at who the winners and losers of the capitalist transformations are, and see what political consequences are coming out of this. I agree with the previous comments. I think it's important not to see the middle class as a homogeneous category. Surely there is stratification there, but I think it would be very helpful if you could clarify a bit in sociological terms who exactly are these categories and how are their political cultural options inscribed in their socioeconomic status. So I think this needs a bit of more clarification, but also to me it was not really clear what exactly did you mean by the fact that the lower middle class is facing the culture of erasure. What exactly do you mean? Like, because of the economic transformation, they are facing an extinction. Like, yes, maybe their socioeconomic status is threatened. My impression is that you have here this huge industry of personal development, in which their mindset is formed in cultivating resilience, and that precarity doesn't translate into questioning capitalism, but questioning their own self and how they can adapt to it. So yes, you can see changes here, but I think their allegiance to capitalism is still there, and ultimately they think the system will work in their favor as well. So I'm referring here to the lower middle class.
Yeah, well, let me say that the first part of the question, I see the vast majority of cultural workers as belonging to the lower middle class. The vast majority. And that includes also university employees, but all the cultural workers, most of the cultural workers from the dependent sector for sure, they are in this lower middle class, threatened to become worse. But then of course this extends to other sectors. And the erasure is, we have already seen it. Like we saw the image with the foundation of the kiosk that was owned sometime in the 90s by a person with middle class dreams who perhaps by owning that kiosk had realized some of it, and then that kiosk has been erased, and with it that person's dreams, history. Here in Iași, we have seen with Mold Mobila, in the very last day, people from the creative industries of Iași who had found on the premises of the industrial, abandoned industrial buildings of this factory in the 2016, 17, 18, they created sort of like an effervescence of creative industries. With it, dreams of the middle class, dreams of, different kind of relationships with the market, with their own work, with the life. And now it's being completely erased by Kaufland buying this territory and completely destroying. And so they were facing the fact that they had never thought of historicizing themselves, first of all. So we see an endless, or at least if not endless, a repetitive repetition of this cycle of small middle class dreams that get brutally crushed and by big capital moves, big capital transformations, and that there's no mechanisms or appeals for this middle class to kind of preserve or do something or keep on being the protagonists of their own history, except from some disparate attempts to digitalize whatever they have. That's not it. So this repeated erasure has started to become visible perhaps now, but it has been a constant phenomenon. It's not something new. And the question is, what are then the instruments, artistic, cultural, sociological, to include that in the work of recovering memory and making it useful politically too? Okay.
Our next speaker is Enikő Vincze, who is a professor at Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj, Romania, initiator of the local movement Căi Sociale Acum, Social Housing Now. She is also involved in national and international housing justice struggles. In her earlier career, Enikő published on nationalist, feminist, and socio-spatial marginalization of impoverished Roma. In the past 10 years, she conducted academic and militant research on the spatialization and racialization of socio-economic inequalities, local and global politics of housing, territorial and environmental injustice, urban and real estate development, housing regimes, state socialism and neoliberal capitalism, and uneven development and capitalist transformation in Romania. She co-edited the following volumes published in 2018: Racialized Labor in Romania, Spaces of Marginality at the Periphery of Global Capitalism, the Romani Women Movement, Struggles and Debates in Central and Eastern Europe, Roughly. Among her articles written in 2023 are The Making of a Racialized Surplus Population, Romania's Labor Housing Nexus, Deindustrialization and the Real Estate Development-Driven Housing Regime, The Case of Romania in Global Context, Studia OVB Sociologia, and so on and so forth. For our presentation, she attempted to reconfigure the concept of creative destruction in a Marxist tone by the notion of destructive creativity. It proposes to politicize capitalist need to enforce the devaluation and destruction of all productive forces and build environments and replace them with something new to create innovative opportunities for capital investment in response to its business cycles. In this endeavor, she will use the examples from the Red Hood project to highlight how capital switching, spatial fixing, decomposing class relations, and reurbanization work in relations to Romania to destroy the socialist industrial complex and replace it with a post-industrial real estate financial complex.
Thank you very much, Livia. Actually, I have to say that I'm not here alone. I'm here with comrade scholars Ioana Florea, Sorin Gog, Livia Pancu, Florin Bogu, George Zamfir, who we authored together, and Misha Dimitriu, and some others who are not here. So we authored together the volume, which was recently published at Routledge. We are very happy with it. Uneven real estate development in Romania at the intersection of deindustrialization and financialization. It was really a great choice for us, for having Livia and Florin also part of artistic field in Iași, and creating together this event about the Museum of Real Estate Development. So actually we are in between productions, the scientific and artistic production, and what you can see on one part of this slide is actually the poster that we created together, which reflects the conceptual map of our understanding of real estate development in Romania. And here I have to say that we are on the same tone with Ovidiu in what regards, at least what regards what he said about how capitalist transformations in Romania as a semi-periphery actually is connected to the transformation of capitalism, globally speaking. And this is very important, and the value of the book and our analysis is also consists in this. So we are not speaking only about Romania. We are not speaking only about those 4 second-tier cities and 4 third-tier cities in Romania. But we are speaking about how capitalism changed in the past 30 years and, among others, generated, animated changes in these local, national and local contexts. And today, this is how it happens. Actually, you publish a book and then you continue to think further. So today I'm trying a new concept here that we did not use actually in the book, which is the concept of destructive creativity. And I hope I will be clear. I start from the totality, so to speak. So first from some conceptual clarifications, and then how I see this destructive creativity of capitalism in what regards the changes in Romania. And then I will illustrate this with a case from Brașov, one of the cities where we did the research, the Radu research. So I proposed us to go through three understandings of the term creative destruction, and I propose to change this, or at least to complete the term creative destruction with a concept of disruptive creativity. Right? So, and I propose to start from what Marx and Engels observed in Manifesto of the Communist Party, middle of the 19th century, who were talking about, among others, the crisis created by overproduction as an endemic feature of capitalism. And they said that this crisis is looked to get over, on the one hand, by enforced destruction of the mass productive forces, and on the other hand, by the conquest of new markets and by the more through exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. So this idea was somehow transposed by the economist Joseph Schumpeter in the middle of the 20th century, so 100 years later, who actually coined this term, creative destruction, and he referred to this as a process of permanent innovation and reconstruction of technological aspects of capitalism. So he was speaking about the process of industrial mutations that revolutionize, as he said, the economic structure of capitalism, always destroying the old structures and creating a new one. And he was referring to these technical developments of capitalism, among others, to the assembly line, to railroads, etc. David Harvey, now he observed that Schumpeter, even if he connected himself to a Marxist understanding of creative destruction, Harvey shows that actually there is a big difference in the way in which Schumpeter understood creative destruction, because he emphasized the innovation part, the positive part of this destruction, always creating something new out of the old, right? And he considered that the negative consequences of this endless creativity were actually some sort of collateral damages and not essence of capitalism, right? So now here I propose to us to think with the concept of destructive creativity of capitalism, and by this term I put emphasis on the process of destruction as an inherent feature of capital accumulation that actually what does, it destroys non-capitalist geographies and non-capitalist economic sectors. So it's not the creative destruction within capitalism, through which capitalism always looks for new ways and new technologies to reinvent itself and go further and do the spatial fixing and capital switching, but it's instances when capitalism actually destroys non-capitalist geographies and economic sectors. So actually this is what I propose for us to think about this big transformation that happened during our lifetime, the switch from state socialism to neoliberal capitalism, right? And to see this moment again as a moment of disruptive creativity of capitalism, because what happened, it destroyed actually a whole political economy regime and replaced it with another one, which at those times in the 1990s was not anymore the state capitalism, but the neoliberalized accumulation regime of capitalism. So through our research about real estate development, because this is what we did actually, we used the research about real estate development to speak about these capitalist transformations, right? So it's this was a methodological and conceptual option for us, and also a political perspective on real estate development, because we don't see it only as a technical matter or some guys constructing something somewhere, making profit of it, but as a political economy process, right? Informed by politics and manifesting through economic transformations. And in our case, what we observed was like actually what was devalued and also destroyed, disappearing, were the buildings, the factories, the old industrial platforms, which were actually the sites of productive economy, which were that part of that industrial complex, which was characteristic also of state capitalism up to the 1970s or so. So these old industrial platforms, sites of productive economy, became sites of new real estate development, sites of capital circulation, an alternative to the first circuit of capital, and were part of what Albers calls the real estate financial complex, where these real estate and financial actors take over decision making and also create a big pressure on the whole productive economy to change and to subordinate itself to this financialized economic logic. So factories disappeared, industrial lands disappeared as such, so the lands did not disappear, but their industrial function disappeared as a result of privatization and deindustrialization. And these lands became, as many of us talked about this yesterday, collaterals, and became the object of rentierism. Their exchange value was deterritorialized, so it was not anymore about the territory, the space, the physical space, but about their financial value, which was connected to financial and speculative ways of using lands. And also these former industrial lands became spaces of regeneration, spatial restructuring. Okay, what else disappeared, devalued and disappeared? The state and social ownership over the means of production, and also the mixed housing regime that we also had in Romania. And instead of this, we got the totally private ownership over means of production and the market-dominated housing regime. Also, what else disappeared? The socialist financial system, the non-profit financial system, the state-owned banks, the loans mechanism that were functioning by those times too. And all those state banks were privatized, then, I don't know, commercial banks from core countries came and made their branches in Romania. And in parallel with this, what happened in Romania with this transformation of financial system, actually happened the financialization of economy globally speaking, as again Ovidiu said. So even more, the transformation of first phase of financialization dominated by banks and bank loans, which was dominant till the last financial crisis, 2014 or so. And afterwards, right, banks seemingly were not enough anymore to produce money from money, but also as a pressure of entrepreneurs, but also as a decision of the European Commission, and not only the nation states, as we speak about Europe, was that to make more space for investment funds, private equity funds, who should play a role, they said, in revigorating economy after the last financial crisis. But actually what they did created another crisis and kept housing prices growing. Okay, what has disappeared? The centralized system all over the place, in terms of territorial development, in terms of production, housing, financial system, and also social reproduction. And the logic of economic development was actually subordinated to the logic of business cycles, from growth to crisis and back to growth. Deep planning, decentralization in economy and public administration, competition everywhere, as we discussed yesterday, the criminalization of the social altogether, social housing, social benefits, the social altogether. So the economic became the king and the social became, I don't know, a kind of threat to the king in a way. Unevenness in every sense of the term, social inequalities, territorial inequalities, so on and so forth. And last but not least, the working class, the disappearance of working class, the devaluation of working class, so of the idea of work, in a sense, which was associated with physical work, the disappearance actually of the socialist way of producing and extracting surplus value. So this would be another talk altogether in itself. I'm not going to detail it, maybe at the discussion, And the system of reproduction of labor force through public services also disappeared, right? So the privatization of social reproduction, what we got in exchange of this, the exploitation of labor alongside the exploitation of housing needs, the expropriation of unpaid labor, of racialized labor, of women's labor, and so on and so forth. So this is the big picture, the totality in my mind. And now the concrete case, which I consider myself very lucky to find so illustrative cases that like this one in Brasov, the former tractor factory, right? Which in its peak times existed and produced on 120 hectares and had 20,000 employees. Nowadays, what we have on that site, if you visit Brasov, is what is called coercive mixed-use development, with a residential component, with office component, with shopping center, and with a hotel. Here I put some pictures just to illustrate the change from state socialist condition of the factory to nowadays. Okay, but now some information again which illustrates why tractor will disappeared and new real estate development occurred on its space. Actually, the global investor also changed. So therefore, this illustrates very nicely. So it's capitalist transformations in Romania, but also transformations of capitalism, globally speaking, that we have here. And what we have here, we have the Ocean Company, which was established in the 1960s as a family company somewhere in France, right? In the 1970s, they created Imoshan as a real estate branch of this retail company to support actually the retail business. In 2018, Imoshan became Citrus. And that was a big thing in the history of this company, because they said it's a total change of their business vision, because they said they want to become a global urban player in multi-purpose property development, right? So not a simple retail company, but a global player who's doing development, is buying lands, develops, sells, manages companies, lands and companies, and so on and so forth. So now, okay. Further on, what happened from this stage of global mixed-use developer investor? was another step towards financialization. Because it's not only banks and financial institutions and investment funds who are signs of financialization, but also the fact that non-financial companies are financialized, as Lapavista said. And this was, I don't know, for example, manifested in the fact that Citrus started to purchase shares from a bank and became a majority shareholder at this bank, ONAE Bank it's called. And then later in 2019, it began to issue its corporate green bonds. So it started to sell bonds to other investors to attract more money, to invest them even more successfully, and enlarging its own portfolio as well, obviously. And also the green bonds idea reflects the fact that they became very green aware, as it goes today, right? Every company has to promise some greening in its business. It's a key of success nowadays. It's a key of funds from EU or states or whatever. It's a key to exploit more the public budget, I guess. They even say on their website nowadays that they combine profitability with social inclusion and green regeneration. So they do everything. They make profit, they are capitalists, but they green, they socialize it, whatever. Okay, in 2023, Citrus reported that it was the owner of 300 shopping centers located in 10 European countries and also some countries in Asia and Africa, and provided more than 4 million square meters to host mixed-use projects and held a portfolio of more than 7 billion euros in real estate assets, right? So a big change from a small family business to what is today. Okay, so and this company entered to Romania in 2012. It was not yet Citrus, it was Emotion. So actually, if you wish, Romania was also a field for experimenting how Emotion changed to Citrus, in a sense. And the brush of case is actually the biggest and the most and the largest and the most ambitious, I guess, mixed-use development. Now they moved, switched also to Rešica. Sorin yesterday spoke about this. How Citrus adjusted its model, tested in Brașov to a smaller city. At a smaller scale, but anyway. So in this we also observed how these big companies, which we could say that, okay, they come and dominate us and subordinate us and the transformations locally, but also adjust to the local conditions because they have to create profitability wherever they go. And they now said that they have 18 commercial centers in 18 Romanian cities, and they are saying, and it's a quote, "We are constantly improving our shopping centers through renovation and rebranding actions under the old shopping umbrella." So, the idea of creative discussion being always innovative, right? Okay. So the part about the destructive creativity, I'm sorry I have to say this, because without this we don't have the full story. It's about how all this global story of creative destruction in Romania in the 2000s became a moment of destructive creativity. And this meant the privatization and disappearance of the Tractorul factory in Brașov. Tractorul was included in 1997 in the first private sector adjustment loan that Romania received from the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and it went through 4 or 5 unsuccessful privatization attempts, and it was sold eventually in 2007 to a British investment company at an open auction. So that was the real end, 2007. Of Tractorul. This British investment company worked locally through a local firm. It was called Flavius Investiții. This is how they do. Actually, in 2009, the local council of Brașov authorized the zonal urbanistic plan proposed by Flavius Investiții, which meant demolishing everything and constructing this mixed-use retail, residential, office development. But they didn't do anything. The crisis came and they sold in 2012 everything, the land, partially demolished buildings, and the local urbanistic plan already approved to Imoșan. So that's when Imoșan entered into this local disruptive story. And from there on, what we have is actually the so-called normal business of creative discussion. So we had this moment of destructive creativity, destroying the state socialist past through the factory and working class and everything that I said. And then the normalized story of creative discussion happens. So how Imoșan, Citrus acted and innovated all the time and created new ideas and investment opportunities and combined itself with local developers, with Casper Development who did the residential area, and which is kind of marketized as life upgraded, right? So everything upgraded, everything is a new style, everything, or the office building, the office sector sold as business being done with care. So we always have this social, human dimension in the way in which they sold their businesses. The hotel of business and lifestyle again. Okay, so yeah, and probably this story will go on. And they will innovate continuously until something revolutionary moment will occur. Okay, sorry.
The architects Planberg are from Cluj.
Planberg was involved in elaborating the zonal urbanistic plan in 2009. And then I found this global architectural office, RMJM, which was also involved. But actually some architects from Planberg. But I think that there was their idea, what they also did in Cluj with the record district, that they kept some industrial buildings and restructured it, like, integrating from the old into the new. Co-working office. Co-working, yeah. Co-working, co-care, committed, innovative, yeah. And yeah, here I put some quotes from how this the residential area is promoted. More than 30 million euros, their imagination is designed. So actually it's not only a call for you, for us, for everybody to come and buy and live there, it's also a call for going there for investment. So buy apartments as an investment.
I was thinking that in our research we explain how money are going into land and what they do. We try to follow what they do, how they do it. But we also think about these huge amounts of money, and we use the metaphors of wall of money and tsunami of money, like we imagine this tsunami of money wiping out and then building walls of money. So I was thinking maybe you want to reflect a bit why so much money, where does it come from, why so much money that does this creative destruction and destructive creativity? What's the fuel for this?
What's the fuel for, or where it comes from?
Yeah, yeah. How it's accumulated in this huge way.
Yeah, so it's this supposition about overproduction in productive sector where capital just stays and doesn't really, it's not profitable anymore. So now the switch of over-accumulated capital towards the real estate sector. This is one way in which scholars explain the origin of this huge amount of money, the fictitious nature of money. So actually, how this fiction of wall of money actually can create something, and how from one company to another and one investment fund to another, there always this speculation and growing more and more the amounts that circulate in this circuit. Yeah, so I don't know what, if you were thinking about something more special.
Lack of taxes on wealth, exploiting labor.
Okay, you were thinking about it. Okay, you expected that.
They're extracted from sweatshops in Asia. They are paying 0.001 cents, 1 hour or something.
Yeah.
This is the money.
But also the stagflation of the West, right? And the need to create value by to move money. Again, we know the need for permanent primitive accumulation, which is related to not to the crisis of growth in the West, of course.
Nick and Banana.
Thanks for such a great presentation. My question is probably a little bit naive, but if you bear with me, I'm wondering about the key criteria to differentiate between creative destruction and destructive creativity. Is it to do with the nature of that which is being destroyed? That if what is being destroyed is not which capital itself is already engendered, then we speak to destructive creativity? That's the fundamental hinge.
So I was thinking, to make this distinction between creative destruction as a normalized business within capitalism and destructive creativity, where the emphasis is put on destroying non-capitalist sectors. So that's my speculation in this concept.
And the creative class then is part of that.
Sorry?
The creative class then.
Many classes are part of this.
I'm just sorry, just as a
But so why it's creation or?
no, but I'm thinking. I'm just wondering. It seems to me there's a term which hasn't come into play, but seems to be in the core becoming increasingly important, which is rentier capitalism. And I'm just wondering, is there a way to articulate from this dichotomy of creative destruction and destructive creativity to the construct of rentier capitalism?
You're right. We should do that. Yeah, we should do that. I mean, to create that to another accumulation regime. Right, so not that based on productive economy, but the one based on rentierism and the speculative investments and circulation of money. So thank you. Yeah.
I have a question, but you need a bit to formulate it. So I think it's very interesting, this research which you did, and it's really very important and builds really understanding of what all flashed through, as you said, the tsunami that went through. But I'm always looking for some cracks in this, and also the museum of real estate development, when we yesterday started to speak a little bit about it, to putting it in the past. So I'm curious, in a way, somehow with this book, you also support in some way, glorify in some way also this development, not really with you intentionally, but you actually speak about it, how successful it is. And I'm curious actually to find cases and cracks where it didn't succeed, where it failed, where something else happened. And I'm curious if you see this as some kind of maybe possible continuation, because we need really cracks. We need to create cracks. And we now might become experts in understanding how it works, but we still feel like without energy and without the capacity to make any change. And I'm looking for ways where that change can come from, and where in that system of financialization and money flushing through, we can find some kind of hope to make some difference. That's let's say.
Yeah, so our aim first was to understand how is this possible globally and in Romania, and all kinds of factors were needed, and actors, including the state, including the local capital, the foreign capital, including the international financial organizations, including the European Commission. So we tried to map, right, all these factors and actors and processes that are necessary to make this system work.
Yeah.
And the system works. That's bad news. Even if some companies fail, right? Because if you look at the individual companies, some disappear or are integrated or are purchased by others, by the biggers. But the system still works. And actually, as they say, we listened to a lot of declarations and videos and everything of investors, and they always said, and yeah, this property forum in Central and Eastern Europe, I went to one of their events in Bucharest, and we were in the middle of the crisis, or people were speculating, are we in the middle of the new crisis or not? And everybody said, the crisis is a new opportunity for us. So that's the creativity, to handle the crisis that you created in a way which makes the system working. And some individuals can manage, others cannot, but that's capitalism, they said. So in this sense, I cannot be very optimistic about how we can generate systemic changes. But I know that there are some analyses and ideas about the definancialization process. Because scholars recognize that you cannot act in a single country or on a single developer or on a single, type of meeting that they have, like MIPIM or property firm, but you need to change the very essence of the system. And for that, you need to change what you can actually change. Can you change the investors' minds? Can we as activists focus on that? Do we have instruments? Do we have some freedom space for them? And or mostly we should focus on the political actors whose decisions are actually facilitating this financialization process. As a small political activist, somewhere here in the Semi-Periphery, I would say it's a second, but I'm not very hopeful that we can do that, because these political actors also change, right? And they also invent always new solutions to solve like as we see nowadays, like the European Commission announced that they are going to create a position for a commissioner for housing, and also to launch an idea that many people actually was talking about priorly. And we just speculate, knowing what they did priorly with this Capital Market Union in 2015 when they supported the advancement of investment funds versus banks. I guess this affordable housing program will be about providing public budget from commission money, or I mean the European funds or national states funds, to support private associations, non-profit companies to create so-called affordable housing, which would be sold or rented a little bit cheaper than the market price. And I'm more than sure that they are not thinking about public housing. They are not thinking about investing public budget. So again, what can we do to change this political logic and change their logic? This is a capitalist state logic now, to support capital in order to pass through its crisis and make economic growing again. Yeah.
One last question from Laura.
Well, it's not actually a question, it's more of a comment. I was just thinking that destructive creativity can also refer to, when it comes to the Tractorul quarter there in Brașov, the way they integrated the history, the working class history, when they put the tractor in the glass showcasing this history and making it very not menacing for capitalism, and I think this is where this kind of thinking with these kind of concepts can help us be creative in our political activism, because we understand that the working class memory is somehow integrated there in their project, in their capitalist project. And so we must always talk about that. This is not a viable way to rethink about the past of the industrial workers there. There must be other ways to...
Yeah, but unfortunately, the tractor has its pre-socialist past when it was aviation, how you say, aviation company. They made airplanes. So unfortunately, this is a crack, so maybe real estate business will crack. But we have this terrible hope of investing capital into militarization and remaking industries around military industrial complex. So that's the crack, and so that's terrible. And we will kind of would like to have back the old good real estate development times, and yeah.
Can I have a more positive?
Okay.
My role is to have a more positive spin, or to give a more positive spin on this, as Anna is asking for. So, because we started with this research in order to understand what's going on, but also to use it as a tool in housing activism, and to, in a way, to be able to see a bit more in the future. And when we negotiate, or when we struggle to say, no, this is not a solution, like Laura is saying, no, this is not a solution, we want this and not this, or this will not work because we understand now what the actors involved want and what they will push for, and this solution will not work like this as it's envisioned by public policy. So it is also a tool in our negotiations and struggles. And also linked to what Laura was saying, actually this entire process was very slowed down and prolonged by huge protests in the 90s. So this is also something that is in the space and in the buildings that we are seeing. Like, there were immense protests. Their memory still exists. It's being shut down slowly, but it still exists. the stories of the people still exist. So I think that's something, despite so much effort and money put into erasing it, as Ovidiu was saying as well, they still exist. So that is something I think. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Enikő.
Mick Wilson, which is an artist, educator, and researcher based in Gothenburg and Dublin. He is currently Professor of Arts, Director of Doctoral Studies at HDK Valent, University of Gothenburg. His current research addresses aspects of political imaginary, with particular focus on the question of how the imaginary may be constructed as an operational space for practice-based inquiries. Today, his presentation is called the speculative genealogy of mostly anglophone artistic discourses or real estate. This presentation will consider some of the different ways in which contemporary art has become a site for critical commentary, analysis, and intervention into housing and real estate speculation. The talk provides an introductory outline of diverse artistic responses to housing, policy, and urban development, drawing upon examples from Ireland, Portugal, Sweden, the UK, and the USA.
Okay, I'm going to try and stick to the time. So I'm setting an alarm for myself. So it's now 1947. So that means I should start talking as now. Okay. Okay, so I probably won't get through lots of examples, but what I want to do is just indicate, okay, I'm looking at a narrow range of materials. Anglophone is the wrong term. I should just say these are Western. It's Sweden, it's the UK, it's New York. And I picked these examples in order to kind of try and profile an arc of development within the contemporary art field where certain ideas that come through, from things like the Marxist analysis of the production of space to the kind of the question of the spatial politics of civil rights era in terms of the desegregation, and also feminist analyses of space, particularly public-private dichotomy and so forth. And an arc of development within the artistic field draws in part from some of these and builds over several decades, so that there's a kind of a coherent development of a discourse, which is both a range of practice and ways of speaking knotted together. And this constant interaction of practice and criticism is something that doesn't produce a monolithic discourse, but produces a kind of a genealogical context of current practices. I'm profiling it not because I think this is the most important thing or the most significant contribution from the art field, but I think it might be a useful reference point for colleagues who are coming from other fields outside of the contemporary art domain. And then I guess for me, part of why I'm interested in this stuff, one reason I'm interested in it is because there's an arc of development from practices of expression and representation to practices of inquiry that maybe operate in very different terms. Okay, so if you lived here, you'd be home now. This is a famous real estate marketing campaign that emerged in the east coast of the US in the 50s and 60s, and it became the title for an exhibition and book project by the artist Martha Rosler, a New Yorker. And this project was enabled by the Dia Art Foundation, which was a wealthy philanthropic project funded by an oil heiress and her partner, who was a German art collector, art dealer. So the Dia Foundation itself was quite heavily invested in the real estate market in New York. So there are kind of contradictions always that sometimes don't immediately appear. Anyway, the exhibition took the form of three kind of large installations in sequence over time, and I won't go into the detail. They addressed a series of propositions. So we begin with home front, looking at housing, gentrification, etc. And then we look at homeless, the street and other venues. So looking at various kind of initiatives, both from activists, from self-help groups formed within communities of homeless, but also artistic interventions in this domain. And then the final City Visions and Revisions was basically a kind of a call to try and find other terms within which to imagine the city. In conjunction with the series of exhibitions at another venue that the Dia Art Foundation owned in the city, they had a series of panel discussions that explored, you know, the same kind of arc of issues, including the question of housing for artists. Okay, so this is an art critic, Nina Montman, writing about 2 decades later, and she just makes the note that the public at the openings of the exhibitions and discussion events were a blend of activists, the usual art public. The art public did not so much take an active role in the discussions, and though numerous art critics were present, hardly a single American art journal reviewed the project. So this was something that did have an art audience, but it didn't really get traction with the art system at the time. The irony that Nina Montman points out is that the European reception of this was quite significant, and I have been teaching this particular exhibition since I began teaching some time ago. So it's something that has a kind of canonical status within undergraduate arts education. So the irony that she points out, locally concerned project, which was concerned with the kind of specific housing conditions within New York, that it should be locally ignored, but then attract and become kind of canonical for an international art audience. The image on the side there of the Twin Towers is from the book itself. So just a context for this project in the late 80s is the change in New York City management in the mid-70s. So this is something that's kind of constantly pointed to in narratives of the development of neoliberal policy, but also in terms of changed forms of city governance. So the New York City fiscal crisis, the slow turn away from the social and deficit spending of Keynesianism and toward neoliberalism and austerity were accelerated. So this was already in place, but it was radically accelerated by crisis in the city's financing. And this is a narrative that's told again and again in popular media and so forth. New York City goes bankrupt and then everything has to be changed. And what emerges out of that is the kind of the neoliberal citadel of global wealth and a vast population of homelessness. And so Ross's project emerges in response to a city that's experiencing the crazy boom of the 80s, but has this massive homelessness issue, and where the city fathers, and I use fathers advisedly, the city fathers wish to just kind of disappear this homeless community. So David Harvey reads this in a pivotal way in relation to the development of neoliberalism. I'll just take this from an interview, I won't read the whole thing, but just he says, at a certain point in 1975, the investment bankers in the city decided not to roll over the city's debt. They decided not to fund New York City's debt anymore. Now, I don't think this was an application of neoliberal theory. I think it was the way in which the investment bankers were beginning to think about the city. And it was kind of a major experiment in which the investment bankers took over the budgetary structure of the city. It was a financial coup as opposed to a military coup. So just to indicate that the emergence of financialization is something that's also a spatial project in the first place. It's not simply an abstract strategy that emerges out in the genius minds of neoliberal economists. It unfolds as a spatial practice to begin with. Harvey's work on the relationship between how capitalism is organised and the production of urban spaces is kind of a touchstone within the contemporary art field. So Harvey is a key reference along with Lefebvre's production of space. So turning for a moment to the UK, so in the same period in the 80s we have Thatcher and Thatcherism. So Thatcher and Reagan famously the ones who install neoliberalism as state practice in both the US and the UK. And here she's standing looking at a model for the redevelopment of the docklands, and she's been guided to it through one of the leading developers. And these kind of redevelopment of the city initiatives in this period also see the invention of new kind of constructs. Here we have the enterprise zones. So these are places where the regime of taxation, regulation are different. So there's a construction of a juridical space outside of, a juridically mandated space outside the regular economic operations of the city. But you also have the construction of new forms of administration. So where local democracy, city councils are displaced, and in place you have development corporations, regeneration entities. This is back to Roster's project, and one of the few references to something outside of New York in that project was to this protest in the Docklands by the Docklands Community Poster Project. So this was an initiative where local community organizations working with trades unions had approached an artist collective to ask them to work with them to do some posters for the area to promote awareness about what was coming with these development plans and how the local community needed to organize. But of course the project kind of evolved into much more than this. So just give you some of the kinds of initiatives that emerge, organizing local communities to produce a counter plan. And this is a strategy that appears very often, where in response to a development plan, artists and activists organize local communities to propose a counter plan. And the key issue pointing to the democratic deficit in these urban regeneration plans. Okay, I'll go through this quickly. So for the proponents of Thatcherism, urban deprivation was the result of a market failure in the inner cities, where land and property markets were no longer seen as attractive to the private sector. The solution was to encourage the market, the private sector, to reinvest in the inner city, which would in turn, so the theory supposed, create trickle-down benefits for the wider local economy and population, and thus address, or that's the trickle-down economics that is the credo of 1980s neoliberalism. And one of the things that emerges is a lot of artists do end up working within this framework, and they become the enablers and facilitators of a lot of this regeneration, providing various, we saw some of them yesterday in the presentation, various kind of beautification schemes or interventions to put a kind of friendly, cozy wrap around what is essentially a kind of violent expropriation. Again, one of these initiatives, New Yorker, and this project was enabled by the Dia Art Foundation, which was a wealthy philanthropic project funded by an oil heiress. Anthology of her essays. So these were texts that she'd produced over the previous decade. This was released in '96, Evictions, Art and Spatial Politics. This book has had a huge impact and basically has set I think it created a certain literacy among artists and art professionals about the problems of gentrification. But it's a very, the reception of it, I think, has been very much in terms of the kind of gentrification is a bad thing, rather than an analysis of the way in which capital functions to produce space. So the resources are there to do this thinking, but it tends to default to quite simplistic kind of, this is good, that's bad. So interestingly, Deutsch gets into an argument in this text with Harvey and others. Just again, a super local focus. This is somebody who's preoccupied with New York. They're writing about what they're seeing. But in this Men in Space section, she takes on the kind of what she calls the Men in Space, or Boys Town, and she's critiquing Harvey, Sawyer, and T.J. Clark, who's a very prominent Marxist art historian who pretty much revolutionized the practice of art history in the 1970s and 1980s and had a huge impact. But she's challenging Clark and Harvey and others in terms of their refusal of feminism as an essential perspective rather than an optional kind of perspective. So Clark's repression of feminism is not, as some commentators claim, necessitated by his interest in the category of class. Instead, it is authorized by his image of the social as a complete entity in which a single set of social relations are privileged as determinate, the absolute foundation of social totality. Feminism, of course, has long challenged this kind of totalizing depiction. And I thought this might be of interest in terms of some of the discussion that almost emerged yesterday. But then so now I'm jumping forward, it's 2012, this is a volume that's coming out of funding from the Netherlands. The participants are coming from the UK, from other parts of Europe, and also from Istanbul. So one of the editors, Fulya Erdemci, was a major Turkish curator and one of the key agents behind this volume. And you see here their concern is social housing, housing social, art, property, and spatial justice. So the volume sets out to examine ongoing transformations in social housing and ask how these transformations are reflected in the aspirations and practices of artists. They propose that their analysis is from a variety of geopolitical and disciplinary viewpoints, from liberal private initiatives to the Occupy movement, to Ramallah, mixing artistic and architectural contributions with those of sociologists, urban historians, philosophers, and activists. So I think that one of the things that I think is interesting about this particular arc of development is where there is an attempt to build a broad encounter across disciplines. So an encounter between arts activists and academics, but also an encounter across multiple academic disciplines. Not always successful, but anyway, this is Andrea Phillips, one of the co-editors, and in her contribution to the text she says, we need to understand the concept of social housing not as a charitable concept, but as a political construction within a wider economic debate. She then itemizes some different regimes of social housing, pointing to the Keynesian version and also to a post-Keynesian neoliberal version. But you see the line in the middle there where she says, on the other, it is an equitable ideological aim to be instituted within any socialist democracy. So I think it's kind of interesting to see one of the spaces where a discourse of socialism circulates as a kind of culturally legitimate mode is within the contemporary art field. That is highly problematic, of course. I mean, it's an interesting thing, but it's obviously highly problematic. Okay, so in this book, one of the things they're concerned to address is there's been, since the 1980s, there's been a massive expansion of the kind of works by artists that are engaging in this broad terrain. And artistic architectural curatorial initiatives over the last 5 decades have variously depicted and intervened in the unevenly developing condition of social privatization, including in the field of housing, with mixed results. And then further down, I've picked out for emphasis, the same initiatives often fall prey to temporal and flexible market-friendly ideals about the lives and long-term needs of potential users. So basically, there's quite a strong development of an internal critique about the complicity of artists' interventions into this space with the things they, on the surface, are critiquing that they actually aid and abet. This challenge of co-option is something that is, I think it's a very dominant theme over the last 2 decades within this conversation. I just cite one example is Bavo. Sorry, I'll put the slides online later. One of the examples is Bavo, who are a Belgian, Dutch outfit, architectural practitioners, critics, but mostly people working the space of criticism and theory. And here they talk about this development as NGO art. Considering the many urgent needs at hand, there is a call for high art statements, big political manifestos, or sublime expressions of moral indignation. Rather, there's no call for that stuff. We don't want that. Instead, what are needed are direct, concrete, artistic interventions that help disadvantaged populations and communities to deal with the problems they are facing. The latter is seen as the only way in which art can regain its credibility and legitimacy as an engaged force in society. Now, they're describing that as something they wish to critique. They're dismissing this as NGO art. And their basic challenge is that where the state is retreating, artists are flowing in to fill the gap. And in doing that, they are both denaturing artistic practice, but also they're simply affecting and supporting the neoliberal project. The art sector is reduced to cannon fodder for a system in which sociocultural programs are increasingly becoming not only merely palliative, but also purely symbolic, meant to give the victims left behind in neoliberalism's incessant march forward the feeling that they're not just left by the wayside, but still somehow count. So what I'm going to finish with is 3 projects that I'm proposing as examples where artists are working knowledgeable and informed, like formatted within this tradition, who are trying to navigate the critiques that are being proposed. So the first one is a project by, So the first one is a project by my colleague Kirsten Bergendahl, who's an artist living in Copenhagen, originally from Gothenburg. And this is a project that she did a little over a decade ago called Park Lake. And Park Lake means park play. And it began in an invitation to make a piece of work in response to the green areas in the city of Stockholm, an invitation from the Marabou Park in Konsthal, which is situated in one of these green spaces in the centre of Stockholm. Out of that process, she came across this project by a local authority in the urban area of Sundbyberg, which has the distinction of being the most segregated along class and colour lines, most segregated commune of Sweden. And the thing that she encountered from talking to people initially about their experience of the green area and what they, in the place where they lived, this image over here is an aerial shot of the commune. What she learned from them was that this densification scheme was being planned by the local authority, and they weren't particularly happy about it, but one of the key things that would happen in the introduction of 4,000 new units of accommodation into the area is that the green areas would be removed. The actual function of the green areas, they've gone. The actual function of the green areas was used to impose a segregation along colour and class lines. So you would have kind of middle class white Swedish, and you would have underclass, working class, and first, second, third generation migrant background. And the way in which they were put together in space was such that the green areas would secure the social divisions. those green areas were going to be removed, and transport links would now, the roads would be the mechanism to secure the spatial segregation. What she did was she established a very slow, painstaking process over years of getting the different constituencies within the area to talk to her initially and then to talk to each other. And she gathered them around models and other kinds of, this is super central to her methodology, was that you bring people into space and they're arguing about something, but they're physically encountering each other and they're working in relation to the model. So in a kind of a discrete way, bringing people into physical interaction with each other. So the simple fact of occupying space together and discussing the merits or not of a particular proposition. Anyway, what comes out of the process is a counter plan that's given to the local authority. The local authority, it also decides to change its planning processes, and that in the future they'll actually begin by incorporating cultural processes into the master planning process. So there's a shift not just in the form of the consultation, but in the agendas of the consultations. This is something that they've announced on their website. I detect some skepticism. That would be very appropriate and healthy. But anyway, we did a book with Scherson in relation to this project, which tried to map it in relation to particular histories of social practice within the Scandinavian context, but also in relation to traditions of planning. Social democratic planning had announced the idea that people are happiest when they open their front door and they see around them people who inhabit the same socioeconomic bracket. And so the idea of social planning is that you put people who are the same together. And that's why in Sweden we now have lots of Somalians living next door to Iranians, because they're kind of the same in as much as they're not white. Yeah. Okay, so I have two more projects to show you. They're both by the same artist. It's Janne van Heeswijk, a Dutch artist who's also works closely with David Harvey as part of a kind of ongoing research project. So this is the island of Eiberg in Amsterdam. So this is ground that has been created out of the water. So this is master planning at its most. Every square centimetre has been planned on somebody's screen before it's been materialised. This is a building that was part of the development plan. This area was going to consist of hundreds of these blocks that would be divided between social housing and private housing, and there would be in this block, to break up the monotony of the grid, there's this urban villa which is designed by a name architect with some kind of affiliation to Rem Koolhaas. So it's like a cool building that was planned, I think. Originally, Van Heeswijk had been approached by the development agency to do a public art thing. She came up with an idea. They said, that's a lovely idea, we don't really want to do it. Why don't you just make a brochure and we'll post it to everybody who lives in the area? And that'll be the end of it. So she stepped away from working with the authority and started to work with private developers and persuaded some of them to give her access to this house for 5 years for a peppercorn rent, i.e. for a minimal rent. And she then set this up as a housing association of the mind, and it became a centre for doing research on this kind of developmental context of instant urbanism, and also as a place for doing experiments in response to what was happening in the development process. So simple things like the social housing units in the block didn't have gardens, so they couldn't grow things. So the garden that was attached to the Blue House became a community garden. These are kind of part of strategies for just building relations. The development project had imagined that the majority of the population would be young, upwardly mobile couples, so they weren't expecting to see children for about 5 to 10 years. So they didn't have any infrastructure for children. So a simple thing like setting up a library within the house. There was as in the early stages of the development of Iberg, there was no infrastructure at all on the island, so they started to provide basically the resources of a community centre, outdoor cinema, a radio station for and by asylum seekers and refugees, which they could set up. This elaborate structure here is to do with the regulation. When a space is created from zero, it's not covered by the regulations that cover ordinary city space. This is an utter confection, so it's covered by special regulation. There's a loophole in the regulation which allowed that if you went into your own building and then went out again but didn't step onto the land that had been created, you were now in an ambiguous juridical space. And in this space they could do lots of things which had borderline legality. One of the things that happened when they did open this space up was there had been a rehousing of a group from the Bijlmer in Amsterdam. And Bijlmer is a very famous working class and migrant part of the city of Amsterdam. And so the influx of a whole new community, I'll finish, I won't go into it, but I just mentioned this thing. The latest project that Jan has been working on is a project with a group of young women in Liverpool who have become property developers. They've developed so it started with a set of houses which were slated for demolition. The new accommodations that were going to be built in the area would not accommodate the people who were living there. There was one particular site which was a bakery, which was a kind of beloved thing. This was being shut down, and Jana, with a bunch of young women, they took over the bakery. They made it a viable business again. They learned how to build. They trained as bricklaying and all that stuff. And eventually they developed the capacity to redevelop some of the properties themselves, and they also developed a cooperative agency. So they basically become land developers. And this is an ongoing project. It started in 2010. It's still going now. What they're doing is they're securing the state social housing spend to fund a development project where they are the owners, so through a cooperative mechanism. So I think this kind of project it's very controversial with, because you can see the question, is this complicity and collusion with the processes that are supposed to be critiqued, or is this a form of acquiring agency at a grassroots level? And I think I would argue for the latter. I also think these are tiny scale operations, but they have the possibility to multiply. And as an intervention into the question of social and public housing, where the state, as it has in Ireland, is just giving money to subsidise people into the private market, if people could organise through forms of cooperative, that actually shifts the ground on which they can negotiate with the state and negotiate with the private market. And it's these kinds of solutions and strategies that are being piloted and thought and experimented with in these spaces of experimental social practice that I've been trying to outline for you today. Sorry for going over time.
It's a bit really over time. It's like, not a bit, it's extremely over time. Sorry, Nick. Mihai, poți mă aud aici? So apparently also there were some problems with the sound on the streaming, so I apologize for our online audience. We're not sure what happened there. Now we are towards the sixth presentation tonight. It's sixth, it's fifth, it's sixth. Sixth. We will end the evening before the opening of the exhibition with STEALTH.unlimited, based in Belgrade and Rotterdam, Florida. They are an internationally active spatial practice. STEALTH.unlimited is an internationally active spatial practice formed by Anna Jokic and Martin Eller. Their work is situated between future fiction, spatial intervention, and the politics of possibility. During the last decade, Anna and Mark co-initiated several cooperatives in housing, energy, and finance to rethink the economy through collective citizens' capacity and create urban commons. Their book Upscaling, Training, Commoning, 2018, traces these adventures following the 2008 global financial crisis. Today's contribution. From where we live, the world has drifted away. I'm quoting from them. This talk stutters out of a perpetual ending of the world as we know it. Time travel starting from Belgrade 90s obliterated concept of societal ownership, moving on to the 2000 methodical scavenging of its carcasses, then a global financial crisis that found nothing more left to foreclose in our society, to spin to a glittering Belgrade waterfront development that, like a real estate zoo, has landed in our city for us to pick at. And there we were. The city didn't want us or need us. And someday your city won't want you either. Hence, we have started rewriting our opinions. Using collective action, adaptation, and persistence, we may have carved out a path from these ruins of today's future.
Well, we have the honor to finish this line of talks, and it's really interesting how it connects to what you were speaking about, because as you saw yesterday, we are quite, and Livia just read now, we are quite involved in setting up a whole line of cooperatives in Belgrade and regionally. And maybe to say our work started with looking at Belgrade in 1990s. You will hear now more about that. But when we decided to go back to Belgrade and actually really move and live there, that was like around 2014, 10 years ago. We came from the world that you just showed. We were very closely part of the world, working with Jan van Heijsok, working in Gothenburg with Roda Stein, doing PhD in Sweden. The book that you just mentioned was a result of our PhD research in Sweden. So we came from this Western context, quite well publicly funded places where we could do really extensive exhibitions and research and stuff like that. We came to a context where there's nothing of this existing. And it was, let's say, reshuffling, and we lived for quite a bit of time on the money that we were earning as PhD candidates in Sweden and doing our stuff in Belgrade. And that finished 7 years ago, so let's say that the world really changed for us. And what we decided to show today is to skip all the stuff that we did in other places, but really to look at Belgrade. We yesterday didn't show any images of the city, so now you will see it. And the story is made out of fragments of what we observed and what we did. And it is semi-fictional. It is also really not trying to be complete. It misses many details, but in some way, I guess you will get a sense of these repetitive ends and beginnings and failures and stuff like that. So we can just we have two slides, so we have to shift between one and the other. Just a second. I want to see through it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that we continue on the message of hope that was started a bit before by Ovidiu. So, thanks. The first episode in this little bit of drama series features the implosion of what we understand as society. Probably some people recognize the quote where it comes from. This implosion of society with its ambitions, protocols, institutions, its assets. It obviously mocks that statement which is here on the screen. screen, but it comes with real transactional value. So in 1992, in Belgrade, some 60% of the apartments were in societal ownership. And that changes in 92 almost overnight, when most of the housing stock gets first nationalized and then privatized to its tenants. And for many, that's actually the opportunity of their lives, you know, like to get to their first real estate. So this is somehow by a lot of people seen as a sort of a victory. But on the other hand, what happens if you happen to live in one of these towers and become co-owner with your 84 neighbors? How do you keep them running? For instance, you know, when the lift stops working, or you know, the light stops. So slowly things start to sink in. That largest real estate grab in society, this privatization, first nationalization and privatization of this societal ownership, that is followed by somewhat uneasy silence. And where now, after we parceled it all out? Next in view get all the cracks, the pores and the surfaces that have not been touched yet. And it's around that time that two brothers settled for a plot on top of a building in the center of Belgrade. Like many others, they decide to, you know, to extend a little to meet their needs. They put these two iconic village houses on the roof in plain view of everyone who crosses one of Belgrade's main bridges. And accidentally they now find themselves in the middle of attention and get instant fame. Pressurized by public exposure, after a while they will fence off their garden with a high wall. So when you go there now, you won't see the houses like this anymore. But many other hacks go unnoticed or simply disappear in the flood of small patchings, additions or fill-ins. And most of the 90s, that's also the time when I arrived, let's say, to Belgrade, the mid-90s, amidst this war environment, deep economic trouble, concrete mixers keep running all over town, like almost day and night. All of that investment needs security, and this quest for legalization becomes over time a hot topic. But what qualifies to get legalized, and what at all is a sort of a just legalization? In Kaluđerica, the first sort of unplanned neighborhood of Belgrade that emerged in the late 1960s, that issue has been for decades long a concern for its, I think now around 30,000 residents. Many of them were seasonal workers, ironically the ones who were constructing the official socialist modernist developments in New Belgrade. But here in the shadow of modernization, they built their own homes without heavy machinery, with their own hands in their free time. Because they basically missed out on that housing projects which others got into, even if they were constructing it. All in a grey zone, hacked together, they also mobilized to collectively make bits of streets and infrastructure. They patched it together. And when at the end of the 90s, all around Belgrade, this call for legalization to secure all these investments which people were doing became louder and louder, they felt like the veterans of the legalization battle. And at night, some of them started to dream of walking into the municipal office for just legalization to make their case. Not only did they miss out on the once promised societal apartments and had to address their own needs, but the great theft also left them empty-handed afterwards. How will they be justly compensated for all those missed opportunities? Others had or have different dreams at night. A bunch of young and still promising architects, at least at that time, and some may be here in the room with you today, start seeing the parallels between Belgrade's frenzied urban transformation and Tierra, this computer simulation developed by ecologist Thomas Ray in the early 1990s to experimentally explore processes of evolutionary and ecological dynamics. It's back. It's early 90s computer technology. It fails a little bit, don't worry.
Viruses.
Okay. Belgrade's newborn urban ecologists soon discover what they will call the genetics of urban transformations. And they develop an unhealthy interest in these self-propelling urban processes and won't recover from this bottom-up paradigm.
So how do we do now? I have to do this and do this.
Yeah, we have to do it. Which one?
Okay, the second chapter, the end of the era of small trickery, starts in 2000 to 2008. In the 2000s, on the whole territory of former Yugoslavia, foreign banks, and particularly Austrian, drive in. Not always as iconic as this rather persistent example, their mission is to introduce housing credits. The now increasing purchase power of citizens, read mortgage debt, fuels a massive boom in speculative housing investment with the aim of making quick money. The construction of these buildings is financed by future tenants paying in advance. It gets accompanied by elaborate schemes of the developer fraud, making buying an apartment again with an uncertain outcome. And on this picture is a protest of an association called Thousands Defrauded. Sometimes in mid-2000s, the parents of our friend and colleague Branko decide to put their savings to secure a housing future for their son. They invest in a prospective construction on Belgrade South Boulevard, where Joel also used to live, just a few blocks further. Initially, the apartment seems unlikely to materialize. Then it appears to be owned not only by Branko, but by multiple defrauded neighbors, and finally it has to be completed by its community of residents themselves. Meanwhile, the developer, so-called developer, coordinates the construction site from inside Belgrade Central Prison, luckily only a kilometer away. Branko's story ends exhausted but on a positive note. However, his neighbor Branka will never enter her unfinished apartment. The developer is thought to have made €1 million from this scheme and gets out after 3 years. Slowly, patience with the increasing level of defrauding starts to shift, and maybe the fifth park marks a turning point. One morning in 2007, the neighbors wake up with the municipal green company cutting down the trees under their windows. Apparently, the municipality has decided to sell off the neighborhood park for a new real estate development. Not that it matters much, but even the construction license is falsified. Construction follows. Contestation follows, and while the neighbors, after countless sleepless nights and weeks, manage to fend off the developer, the site remains destroyed for years to come. Still, it is largely seen as the first successful act of civil resistance to real estate pressure.
The 2008 global financial crisis marked somehow this downfall of neoliberal capitalism, at least this unfailable path forward which it was promising. But most of the crisis initially surpasses Serbia. Meanwhile, the stakes get bigger. In 2009, Belgrade hosts the University Olympic Games, this Universiade, and is to construct this athlete village. When the city realized they actually have no funds to construct that village, it decides to give a plot of land free of charge to a local magnet, to construct the athlete village. The apartments are used for the sporting event just for 2 weeks. There's one hiccup, however. Next to the site sits a Roma settlement. 3 months before the opening of this Universiade, the city bulldozes their 40 houses. And later on, Universiade volunteers tell to sportists that this was actually a film set. After the sport event, the apartments get on sale for €1,800 per square meter, and that marks the beginning of many such giveaways of valuable urban land for commercial development. In April 2009, B92 television airs the first of a 7-part documentary on corruption and construction mafia, and it highlights the circumstances around the brand new shopping mall in New Belgrade, built on a plot of land right in front of the former headquarters of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, which now gets turned into a business tower, reborn into a business tower. A public discussion focuses on how these 5 hectares of land are actually given to the developer without any gain for city and state. And when looked at all these transactions going on, almost 2 billion euro loss for the city budget appears. If you look at all this land which basically has been given free of charge to developers. But meanwhile, there, somewhere in the shadow of these developments, a call is launched to start addressing the cost of living situation for many Belgraders, possibly at a third of the market price. And maybe I should just read it. Are you interested in building a decent apartment somewhere in Belgrade, 300, 400, 500 euro per square meter, without getting yourself into debt and unpayable loans, living in impossible conditions, or waiting for your relatives to move to the countryside or to heaven? Impossible. A whole bunch of people gets together in former Cinema Rex and spend countless hours to see if somehow it could beat the status quo. The mood fluctuates, but we understand it will be a long walk. Circumstances bring us all the way to the edges of the city in search of a location that would fit the affordability level we are looking for, or let's say, we say that how deep our wallets are. Yes, a long walk, but not everyone is convinced that we need to go out so far. Meanwhile, in 2014, the two of us, Anna and me, get a chance, the chance of a lifetime, we could say, to construct our own apartment. We replace the attic of Anna's family house. Anyway, also some craziness.
The next chapter is necessary. It starts with 2014, still lasts. A Serbian Arabic fairy tale begins. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates visits Serbia for a bit of skiing and decides to buy a hotel at the ski resort Kopaonik. You know how it goes when you ski. It marks the first of many United Arab Emirates investments in Serbia for the years to come. And yesterday we heard a lot about the importance of IMF and World Bank documents to understand the dynamics of real estate development in Romania. In Serbia, on the other hand, we need to get a bit closer. Our guys need to keep a close eyes on the developments. Barely a year later, in 2014, June 2014, the desert fairy tale drops in Belgrade. Belgrade's waterfront development is announced. We are looking at a whooping 90 hectares of prime city location, at that moment 95% state-owned and used by Serbian Railways. To streamline the new friendship, a lex specialis, state exception, gets introduced. Yes, why not? At the heart of this plan is the Belgrade Tower, a 42-floor, 168-meter tall skyscraper. For its appearance, the architects claim to have been inspired by a nearby river. Well, good luck with that. Fairy tale needs to live on happily forever. So also this one. This year, it extends and keeps eating away at the public land. Currently, the Belgrade Fairground is up for a new challenge. There are also new arrivals, not only from the Emirates. Followed from the war in Ukraine triggers an influx of mainly Russian citizens. It causes a massive rise of prices, both rental and purchase prices. In 2023, according to available data, Russian citizens invested more than 180 million euros in real estate in Serbia. For most Belgraders, living in the city became unpayable. And maybe you can.
This is what the blogger Amnesia says, speaking from the perspective of those who find themselves at the receiving ends of some sense of betrayal, of being unaccounted for, being no longer part of the game. So she says, here's the thing, from where I live, the world has drifted away. We aren't precarious, we're unnecessary. And what's worst of all, everybody who met us seems basically pretty okay with that. The bottom line, repeated just below the surface of every speech, is this. Those people are in the way, and it's all their fault. So we want to take you along to a future in which that world has drifted away from most of us. And like Amnesia says, you didn't see that in the quote, but someday it won't want you either. Hence, we started rewriting our options. Let's call it scenario 2, for the better or worse. So let me tell you a bit about the scenario we've started to inhabit. In this scenario, there's hardly any shared reality anymore. It has drifted away, as we've seen. Instead, the stage is claimed by a set of smaller actors, vested in networked communities and workshops at neighborhood scale, organized as cooperatives. A place where we are no longer on someone else's territory, to discuss and to take action from a base and place of support. Over time, we've started to lay out the foundations for our novel communities, peer-to-peer learning, training ourselves for what is to come. We've come together from throughout our region, activists, researchers, architects, turned self-developers, self-investors, self-producers, from the cracks and the ruptures, building a future in and on the ruins of today's society. Where we face roadblocks, we try to hack our way around. Like with the accelerator, which is a revolving financing instrument built around the fund capacity of €1 million at its start. We are now building this up to reach over 15 million in 5 years. Capital that at the disposal of new housing, brought at the disposal of new housing initiatives to get the projects off the ground. What is at risk of being stuck now will get snowballed forward. The first building to get rescued out of the market with this mechanism is this factory building, a relic of industrial post-socialist leftovers, stuck in time. We will unlock it, reset its clock, let it tick again. Students kicked out of their dormitories will collectively run and govern the place with some of the productive cooperatives in our extended network, but it doesn't stop with the places we live or work. We're setting out to cover our basic needs, energy for once, constructing our decentralized resources with community effort. Our camp is growing into a federation of collectives, fire makers, sign makers, reclaimers, sustainers who feed us, the situation makers, the troubleshooters, the memory keepers, and more.
And likely in decades from now, some of us will come to scavenge the rest of that what was once seen as the future ahead, like the Belgrade Tower we saw earlier in this story. In the year, what is this, 2100?
Yes.
2100, a young brother and sister are forced to embark on an epic journey as rising sea levels make the Adriatic coast unlivable. On their way to higher grounds, they hear about a vibrant new development in Belgrade. They discover that a new society is occupying the former apartment buildings of what once was called Belgrade waterfront, a crowded, walled-in city within a city. Over the years, with many other citizens, they learn to adapt and navigate this walled city, not only to find a new life, but a new way of living. And so it was.
You're on. I was here. Just a funny fact, I used to live in those houses.
You lived. I thought Stefan was living, but you used to live. Wow. Great.
Cool. Yeah, they became notorious. You knew that?
You lived.
No, but you knew. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Do something.
Are there any questions for Anna and Mark? And maybe me also.
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry.
I think there was some. I heard of it.
No, Mark.
No.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. If you come back a little bit, if you can come back a little bit to the accelerator and talk a little bit about this in, let's say, a longer time frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The longer time frame is actually that. Well, maybe first a short introduction, and then we get okay. So one thing we are all very much aware of is that if you start engaging with housing, you need like massive amounts of capital. It's like it's completely different branch of activism, and it is actually one of the things which brought all these groups from from Zagreb, from Ljubljana, from Decin, from Prague, from Belgrade, and what I missed, I don't know. Budapest, yes. Budapest, exactly. What brought us together, because we realized that in this peripheral part of, at least of the capital industry, let's say, that where money is produced in Europe, we have very poor access to to affordable, patient, long-term flows of money. So this is one of the first things we started to think about, and we were all a bunch of we are all a bunch of cooperatives. But one of the cooperatives which joined us is Cooperative for Ethical Financing, and that was and that was really a win, because that really opened up, let's say, our perspective that maybe it is, and that's where it is also a very long-term view, that maybe instead of like always being dependent on commercial banks as either as as money generators or as middlemen from European flows of money and stuff like that, maybe we could over time get that capacity ourselves, and that's where we are setting up this. It's basically financing instrument. But we have also been, over the past years, closely working together with this emerging cooperative ecosystem in Catalonia and in Barcelona. They are a few years ahead of us, but they have, for instance, their cooperative, their financing cooperatives. They have access to some friendly banks and stuff like that. But they are running also in. They're running to the boundaries of what you as a bunch of cooperatives yourself can generate, because they get the money from their members, they invested in housing. There's only, because it's so expensive, there's only so much you can do with that. So along with this accelerator, as you could say, as a sort of a patch to fill the voids in this peripheral world of capital, to do the things which in other places, like in Austria, you can easily, as a cooperative, get access to relatively friendly and long-term forms of finance. We have to hack it here, but we are still also together thinking of how to build up our own longer-term financial institution along with this cooperative for ethical financing. So the accelerator is a patch, but for us it's not the end of let's say of where we would like to achieve. But we are embarking here territory where we are, we're all coming from very different sides. So this is definitely something where we had to learn not to stand in our own way, let's say, to enter there.
Yes.
Or it's an alternative
within It's within the capitalist system. It's not an alternative to. It works with money. It works with fiat money, euros or whatever it is. It it might at some point also use, like stuff from European Investment Bank or things like that. Only the conditions under which cooperatives, part of this network, can get access to that will be completely different, because it's our own tool, and together we decide the rules, and we don't have to make profit on our own instrument. So that is different from what you would get in the, let's say, in the mainstream or commercial bank or finance world.
Just to add, maybe inspired on this, what we are doing, there are a number of other initiatives, similar initiatives. There is one in Germany also, where they want to create a similar sort of instrument to support housing initiatives outside of Germany.
And that's,
because there is it's much more difficult to get. So for instance, money, in Greece or in Portugal or maybe in our region. So there is solidarity across, international solidarity, let's say, also, which is essential for this network.
I'm just trying to think who would be your main partner beyond the collectives themselves. Would be the state probably, because it should have a
At this point, none of our states is friendly towards this. Maybe in Croatia, yes.
Well, the state not yet in Croatia, but
some
municipalities are starting. Yeah. But I don't think that.
But Orban's country
friends
in Serbia are not going to be friendly to this.
Yeah.
Just very quick about the term cooperative. So the term cooperative, forgive me if I don't know, but I'm just curious to know, there are no fixed stakes on the state in a cooperative.
No, cooperatives is a union of individuals on free will, on democratic base. There is no state involved in cooperatives. Maybe before, in socialist time, there was this connotation, but these cooperatives are completely independent.
Yeah.
It's a very different terminology from the Asian context. A cooperative will always have a common stake.
Yeah.
In India.
Mm-hmm.
Not a major one, but yes, there will be some stranded or some support.
Not in this new stream of cooperatives, it's not the case.
But that's why I say that probably state should be your partner in the sense of creating the law framework to encourage your cooperative and other cooperatives.
It might happen, but we are very cautious about this. In Serbia, there is some interest among few people in the Ministry of Construction which are friendly to what we are doing, but they are low ranks and not at all of any influence. So, yeah, we will see.
Can I ask a question? Are you connected in a way to other housing activists, like those claiming public housing?
Yes, we are very connected. Yes. I mean, this is not the only solution and the only way to go, but in the current circumstances in which the public authorities and institutions are very unfriendly, this is for us the way that we see it's possible to pierce a hole, to make some change in our lifetime, because we don't want to die without achieving any alternative. I mean, me personally, I really don't find this. For me, it's really need. There is a need to create desire for different way of living. It's not just economical and affordability issue. It's really desire to live differently in the context in which people are disengaged from society, very individualistic, fragmented, unsecure, afraid, unsupported, and this is also an attempt to really, from bottom up, change with what we can our reality more or less now, and not wait for some 2100 when the system will collapse and waterfront will become something else. That's our point of view. And what we find interesting is that I personally, and Jorgs knows me from, and you also know me from more like this activist movement against evictions and all of that. And that is dormant now more, it's not so active anymore. And these activities that we have now really attract people with a positive attitude, like let's do something. Like we are here, we want really to change something. It's like people are really looking for opportunities to make at least a small change. And I know this also from the energy cooperative that we started. Like last week we built two small, I just to add this, two small solar power plants on a very contested and area in which there was a lot of fight in the east of Serbia, southeast of Serbia, against small hydro power plants in the nature reserve. And this struggle succeeded, but with a complete devastated community interest. Okay, we fight this, but we what next? And then we, as energy cooperative, we decided to work with these people locally and make the first cooperative power plants there. In this context, work together with them. That all income from that will go to the local communities. After 2 years, after we had the successful crowdfunding campaign for this, last week they were launched, and just the reaction of people in media who were calling, like, to speak on the radio, this and this, like, people see in such a small miniature act some sort of see in them a positive thing that is really needed in society, because everything is so dark that people just need some vent or somewhere to do some positive change.
The spark.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's all at this scale small, but I think it's important to make small changes.
You don't play for the revolution.
No. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I would be happy. I can see it.
That's the spark.
Do we end and try
To open the bar.
Open the exhibition.
Yeah. No, first of all, I want to mention everybody who was present Thursday, yesterday, and today, and thank everyone. So we would like everybody to thank the Redor team, George Zanfirko, Vince Misha, Mick Ioana Flora, Vladimir Bus, Mick Wilson, Andreea Fogarasi, Andrei Timofte, Milița Goreu, Sara Muscaru, Derea Bulgaru, Mona Bătămanu, Tudor, Cătălin Gheorghe, Cristina Moraru, Britica Turia, Sorin Gog, Ovidiu Țichindeleanu, Anna Jokic and Mark Nellen, Shkart group represented here through George Balmazovic, Silvia Magi and Bogdan Armanu, Andrei Pripasu, Semeneh Ayalew Asfaw. Also, I want to thank very much to the artists that allowed us to do the screening on the 1st of August. Dana Costoaie, Dragoș Alexandrescu, Matei Bejenaru, Andreea Faciu, Cezar Lăzărescu, and Andreea Cioară. I want to thank to the invaluable help of Mihai Apostu here, the director of streaming, Nicu Oniciuc, also to our colleague Andrei Gavril, who will be of invaluable help tomorrow, and to Pancu Jeta, who did the great sarmas. And I also want to thank very much to Esther Brandel, Ioana Tran, and Laura Sandu, who made all this effort to come and join us in person here. I want to thank you also to Florin. Hi. And yes, and